Hello, I'm Pastor Rick, and welcome to our podcast. I hope that the message that you're about to hear will bless and encourage you today.
Well, welcome. I'm so glad that you guys are here. I am Pastor Evan, the youth and associate pastor here, and I am going to preach for you today. So thank you so much for being here. The title of my sermon is, What is in Your Hand? What is in your hand? And actually, just recently, I had in my hand a caramel macchiato, a venti caramel macchiato, and I was carrying it in between those double doors back there, and there was just pressure on the door, and it snapped back. It hit my hand, and it fell, and it splattered all over the floor, and I was so sad, and I ran, and I grabbed a paper towel, and I was like getting it up, and Bev Wampler came up to me, and she said, "Did you spill coffee this morning?" I was like, "Yeah," and she's like, "Serves you right for not getting coffee from me that I made this morning," and I was just like down there squeezing it like, "I'm sorry, this is the worst." So thank you, Bev. She convicted me of my spending $6. Goodbye. That's okay. I'm okay. I'm going to be okay. So, what is in your hand? I have with me this walking stick, and in fact, I want you guys to think of it more as a shepherd's staff. We're going to talk about shepherd's staff, and I actually got this. Dad, you remember where I got this? You weren't there? We hiked in North Carolina. We went to Grandfather Mountain down in the Smoky Mountains, yes. And I got this staff. I really wanted a walking stick for some reason. I was like, I want this walking stick. And maybe that was the Holy Spirit. 13-year-old me was like, I need a walking stick because I knew one day I was going to preach with it. And so here I am. So yes, this is a cool visual that I want to show you, but I want to talk a little bit more before I get into that. So, there's a lot behind this one word that I want to talk to you guys about this morning. It's the word calling. Calling in our lives, calling, and what the meaning is. I know that as believers, if you are a follower of Jesus, you are called to grow closer and more in your relationship with Jesus. You're called to disciple. You're called to help people grow in their relationship with God, and we are all called to evangelize to the world around us. That is a calling that we have. But what about a specific calling? Does everybody have a specific calling that God has ordained upon our lives? And if he does, maybe that only goes within the limitations that we have upon ourselves. Like, I can't read that well, so would I be called to lead a Bible study when that's not something I can do? Or I'm a little older, again, am I able to reach kids and reach youth? Am I able to be involved in that way? I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, so am I called to do ministry? There's calling in our lives, and I just want to know, is there a specific calling for each of us? And so if you guys can get your Bibles out, we're going to dive right into Scripture, Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4. So in this verse, this is actually, I like to get context to verses so I know that what is being talked about applies to me. And what Ephesians is, this is actually Paul's letter to the church in Ephesus. They are a church in Greece, and he is talking to them and giving them instructions on how to live their life. And so if you read Philippians, 1 Corinthians, Galatians, basically what that is Paul is talking to these specific churches. And so in Ephesians chapter 4, what Paul is doing is he is giving instruction to that church. And so when we read this, we're not just simply reading Paul's instruction to that church, but he's giving instruction to all churches on wise living. So each of these verses apply to us and our church. And so this is what it says in verse 1. Therefore I, a prisoner for serving the Lord, beg you to lead a life worthy of your calling, for you have been called by God. So Paul is talking to this church. He said, lead a life worthy of your calling. So he says, step up to the calling that you have. Step up to your calling to live as a disciple, discipling people, and evangelism. Step up to that calling. But do we have a specific calling? And he goes on, and I love this so much because when I think about calling, I think we want to just be gung-ho for it and be powerful, but then he tells us a little bit of instruction about how to do that. He says, always be humble, and gentle. Be patient with each other, making allowances for each other's faults because of your love. Make every effort to keep yourselves united in spirit, binding yourselves together with peace, for there is one body and one spirit, just have you been called by the glorious hope for the future. Now, I want to do a little segue. I've seen this word unity a lot as I've been studying Scripture. In fact, Jesus was praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he was saying, God, let them be one as you and I are one. And I just think if the church valued unity the way that God commanded within the Bible, how different would we look? How different would it be if we just went after unity for the people around us and denied ourselves, denied being right, denied getting what we wanted and said, I want to be unified, let's go after that as a church, as a body, as all believers. How would we look? But Paul goes on, Jesus probably speaking through Paul, but he says there's one Lord, one faith, one baptism, and one God, Father of all, who is over all and living through all. We are called to live a God-honoring life with the one God and the one Spirit. However, he has given each one of us a special gift through the generosity of Christ. That is why the scriptures say, when he ascended to the heights, he led a crowd of captives and gave to his people. And gave gifts to his people. So with that verse, it kind of shows us that we each have a specific calling. We each have been called by God to live out a God-honoring life in a different way. And that means that nobody's calling is greater than another. Pastor Rick has been called, hi Pastor Rick, by the way. Pastor Rick has been called to lead this church. That is God's calling that he put on his life. But that is no more or less important than Christina, who's been here cleaning these offices, making sure that this is a good place. It is no less or more important than Jack, who is downstairs ministering to our kiddos. The person who is upstairs directing this service, making sure it is going online, is no less important than me, who's standing up here, and Nathaniel leading worship. Each calling is just as important because it comes from God. We're all called. It may look different, but it is good, and we want to step up to that calling. So I want to kind of give us instruction on how to do that, because I know in our brains we have all kinds of thoughts and doubts and excuses and limitations that we have, and it can only fit within that, but it might be a little different. I want to tell you a little story about me. When I was a teenager, more recently, I think this is just a big part of my life. I call myself Eager Evan. I'm so eager. Whenever I get excited about something, I want to do it, and I want to just get right there right now and just push my way through. And when I was in high school, we used to go to like youth camps. And they were so vibrant and exciting, and sometimes the evangelist who was speaking would have prophecies for students and saying to one student, you are called to be a missionary, or you're called to be a lawyer and you're going to save people. You're called to be a youth pastor or a kids minister. And I just got so excited going to these camps, and I think, what if this guy went to me and said, you are called to ministry? How cool would that be? And I was just so eager for that, because I knew that if I had that, I would have full confirmation. I could run towards it with all my might. And so sure enough, Eager Evan was sitting on the front row, and he was just probably sitting, looking at the evangelist, and I saw his face. He was ready to prophesy over somebody, looking around, and I'm just like, come on, baby, come on. And he didn't, and I'm grateful for it. In fact, he said, you over here, you're called into ministry. And that was my cousin. And I was so upset, and I said, what, do you know who this person is? Like, what the stuff that he does all the time, how could he be the one that is called? Why didn't you just pick me the entire time? And later in life, I've looked back at that moment, and I thought, if God said that through that evangelist at that moment, I would have bulldozed my way through in order to get to ministry, and God would have not taught me the lessons I needed to learn. And I would have said, I don't care what you say, what instruction you have for my life, I'm going into ministry, and that's what I'm doing. But God had a different path. And now I'm grateful. I believe, though, today that a majority of the body of Christ has failed to respond to the calling that God has placed on our individual lives. And I think there is an opportunity for us to step into the callings that he has for us. And if we push past these limitations that we give ourselves, what could we do? And so there's several points that I want to talk to you guys about, but it is going to go through several stories that I have for you. So the first one, I want to talk about a guy named Moses. Moses is in Exodus chapter 3, and he was an Israelite, and at this time the Israelites were slaves to the Egyptians, and they were just brutally treated by them. But Moses was blessed by God. He got sent down a river, was able to be received by some just higher up Egyptians and raised in the Egyptian temples, and he was just this awesome guy. And in fact, he figured out that he was an Israelite, and so he saw a guard mistreating an Israelite, and he killed him. And out of that guilt, he fled the country, fled to a far-off land, and became a shepherd for 40 years. And so in Exodus chapter 3, Moses is tending his flock, and he's got his shepherd's staff, and he's walking. And he's minding his own business, and off in the distance, he sees a burning bush. He's curious about it because this bush is on fire, and he doesn't know why it's on fire. It's probably a crazy sight. I don't know if there's a lot of forest fires like California, but this bush intrigued him, and so he went up to it. And in Exodus chapter 3, verse 4, we're going to start there. When the Lord saw Moses coming to take a closer look, God called to him from the middle of the bush, "Moses, Moses." "Here I am," Moses replied. And God goes on to tell Moses about how he heard the cry of the Israelites to be out of slavery from the Egyptians, and that he was going to send Moses, and he was confirming that Moses was called. He had a specific calling on his life, and Moses, just like all of us do, like I always do, I say, I don't know if this is what I should do. I don't know, and God confirms, I will be with you. And it's so funny because even when God says he will be with Moses, Moses continued to doubt. He's given all kinds of excuses, and in chapter 4, he gives him this really, really cool command. Moses was arguing. Moses protested again. "What if they don't believe me or listen to me? What if they say the Lord never appeared to you?" Then the Lord asked him, "What is in your hand?" "A shepherd's staff," Moses replied. "Throw it on the ground," the Lord told him. So Moses threw the staff on the ground, and it turned into a snake. I prayed that this would turn into a snake, but it didn't, but that's okay. It turned into a snake. Moses jumped back, then the Lord told him, "Reach out and grab its tail." So Moses reached down to grab its tail, and it turned back into a shepherd's staff in his hand. "Perform the sign," the Lord told him. "Then they will believe that the Lord, the God of their ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, really has appeared to you." So one of the key points that I want to share with you guys today is God does not call the equipped. He equips the called. Notice the order that God was telling Moses these things. "Moses, I've heard the cry of the people, and I'm going to send you. This is the calling that I've put on your life. And in order for you to get there, I will be with you." Sometimes we say, "I can't do this thing because I'm not fully equipped for the calling that you have." And God says, "I just want you to step in faith and accept the calling that I have. And as you take those steps in faith, I will provide the resources for you." Sometimes it's nerve-wracking because you don't think that you will be fully equipped to take those steps, but as you step out, it gets easier and easier because you know God is providing. And I always say when fear and doubt comes into my mind, if God can get me this far, why would he leave me behind now? So Moses, finally, he's equipped, and he gets all kinds of other confirmations from God, but he takes his staff, and he goes all the way to the Pharaoh in Egypt, and he says, "Let my people go." The Pharaoh denies him, so he sends all these plagues all over Egypt, and it's just crazy story. And finally, he's able to free the Israelites. And as they're going, the Egyptians change their mind. They're chasing after them. They don't know what to do, so Moses puts his staff in the Red Sea, and it splits, and they walk through free. Moses was called, but God equipped him with a thing that he had in his hand. So later in time, there's another story that leads me to my second key point. Later in time, in 1 Samuel 17, there's this boy. He's a shepherd named David. And he was anointed by Samuel to be the next king, but in this time, the Israelites were in war with the Philistines, and what's going on at this time is the Israelites are facing on one side, the Philistines are in another, and they're just sitting there, and there is a 10-foot-tall man in the center, challenging the Israelites, mocking their God, saying they can't do it. He says, anybody who jumps up against me will be squashed like a bug, and the Israelites are afraid. And so the shepherd boy named David goes into this battle line because he's taking lunch to his brothers. He's just doing his thing. And he sees what's going on and is asking questions. People are getting frustrated about it, but David knows that God is with his people. And so he says in 1 Samuel 17, verse 32, "Don't worry about this Philistine," David told Saul. Saul was the king at this time. "I'll go fight him." "Don't be ridiculous," Saul replied. "There's no way you can fight this Philistine and possibly win. You're only a boy, and he's been a man of war since his youth." David persisted. "I have been taking care of my father's sheep and goats," he said. "When a lion or a bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club and rescue the lamb from its mouth. If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and club it to death. I have done this both to lions and bears, and I'll do it to this pagan Philistine too. For he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine." Saul finally consented. "All right, go ahead," he said. "May the Lord be with you." I heard one time somebody was talking about this story, David and Goliath, and in fact, when a shepherd at this time was defeating a lion or a bear, they would inscribe the emblem of that animal on their staff. So as David's walking and he's got the shepherd's staff with him, he has the reminder of the victories that God has already put him through. And so he knew that at this moment, God was going to make him victorious because he already had the stories along with him, because that was what was in his hand. And so this next part is so cool to me. Saul gave David his own armor, a bronze helmet and a coat of mail. David put it on, strapped the sword over it, and took a step or two to see what it was like, for he had never worn such things before. "I can't go in these," he protested to Saul. "I'm not used to them." So David took them off again. He picked up 5 smooth stones from a stream and then put them into a shepherd's bag. Then, armed with only his shepherd's staff and sling, he started across the valley to fight the Philistine. I just think of this scene so much because David's in a shepherd's robe. He's probably not wearing super armor, and he's not the most big person in the world, and he's got this staff with him and this slingshot with stones, and he's like, "This is what I got. I'm gonna go." And I just think of how hilarious this scene must be. And I think of our lives, and sometimes we think we must step up to a mantle. We've seen what people have done to be victorious before, and we say, this is what we need to do in order to be successful. And that leads me into my second key point. God doesn't want you to be something you are not. God gave David everything he needed. He didn't need to put on that armor because he knew the victories that God had already given him, and he knew God was faithful. And in order to step up to our callings, we need to know that we don't need to be anything different because God made you who you are to step up. So this next part I think is amazing. I love reading this because David is just so confident in God. David walked up to Goliath while he was being mocked. And he says this in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 45. David replied to the Philistine, "You come to me with sword and spear and javelin." In fact, he's not looking straight ahead. He's looking at a 10-foot tall man, so he's probably looking like up this direction, confidently, just standing in front of him. And he said, "You come to me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Today the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you and cut off your head, and then I will give the dead bodies of your men to the birds and wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. And everyone assembled here will know that the Lord rescues his people, but not with sword and spear. This is the Lord's battle, and he will give you to us." This kid, so small, not wearing any armor, with just a slingshot in his hand, is going up to this 10-foot tall armored man with a giant javelin and says, "God will deliver you to me." Goliath goes in to attack. He goes and David swings his slingshot just a little bit. One shot right to the forehead. Goliath falls dead. David cuts off his head, and the Israelites are so encouraged and so ready. They chase the Philistines and completely defeat them that day. All simply because David knew who he was. He knew the victories God had given him, and he knew he had everything that he needed in order to defeat the Philistines. God does not call the equipped. He equips the called. And God doesn't want you to be something you are not. And my last key point for you guys today: you are capable because you are not. You are capable because you're not. So don't check out yet. I want to tell you a little bit of a story about myself. I went to a college called Atlanta Leadership College. And I was there for 3 years. I was super excited about it because it was a hands-on ministry school, because if you put a textbook in front of me, I'm going to get frustrated. I want hands-on experience to learn about ministry, so I was so excited to go to this school. But for some reason, as I was going there, I didn't feel like I fit. I think there's a little bit to the just being a suburban boy in Atlanta. When you smile at somebody in a big city like Atlanta, they don't smile back. In fact, I feel like they hate you more when you smile. It's crazy. But as I was there, I just felt like my value as a student, like my place in the tier list was going down and down and down, and I couldn't tell why, and I didn't fully understand, and I just felt like I was not valued. And I got frustrated. And I tried to have a good perspective on this. I said, you know what, maybe God just wants me to be humble. Maybe that's what they wanted for me in my life. But as I continued to go through the program, I felt like they didn't think that I was capable of doing the ministry. I had an overwhelming feeling that the student body and the staff saw me as a lesser person, and I wasn't able to do ministry like them. The school is recently shut down because of moral failings within the staff, and it was a hard time because a lot of people were falling away because of what was going on. A lot of people were hurt, and there was one staff member who I just loved. His name was Kyle. And for some reason, he just wanted to disciple me. He wanted to help me. He was my staff coach, so he was told that he had to disciple me, and he tried his best to see value in my life, and I'm so thankful for him. And a year ago, he sent me a message. And I want to read that for you guys. It says this: "Sir Eickhoff, I know this is random, and we literally have not spoken in over a year. I somehow stumbled upon one of your sermons on YouTube tonight. While I do not hold many of the same religious beliefs I once did, something struck me as I watched you at your craft. I often struggle with decisions I've made in my past, not just with ALC, but in general. Something that came to me as I watched your sermon was how we didn't allow kids to be kids at ALC. We were constantly calling 18-year-olds to be far more mature, both spiritually and mentally, than was necessary or even at times healthy. I think in your time at ALC, along with many others, you were often looked at as a weaker student. I don't say this to make you feel bad, but the fact of the matter is, as I am sure is no surprise to you, ALC was constantly grading the potential of young adults on pure instinct under the guise of religion and discernment. And you were never discerned to be one of the fittest of the pack. Socially awkward at times, timid, not too outspoken, and even nerdy. I'm not that nerdy. I hope I never fed into these games we played with students' futures, and if I did, please accept my deepest apologies for falling for the trap set by my superiors to play the games they dedicated their lives to. But nonetheless, my point in this text, as I watched your message, I was struck by a man who is mastering his craft. We had decided that in 9 to 18 months of your young adulthood that we could determine the future for you based on instinct. Your ability to communicate your points today and express your passion through articulate preaching is truly amazing. You're an incredible speaker. It was inspiring and humbling to see. Keep up the good work, my friend. I know I'm sure this came off a tad rambly. It is 3:30 a.m. after all. Anyways, keep up the good work. It is my honor to have known you and walked alongside you as I pretended to be put together and have answers to things I myself questioned. I know I put on a good show many of the times we spoke, but I also know and want you to know as well that while I am not perfect, I was always genuine in my time with you and everyone under my watch at ALC. While not fully put together spiritually in my time there, I was always 100% me. I hope you are well. Keep up the good work. Never stop mastering your craft. You are incredibly talented. Thank you. My third key point. You are capable because you are not. I'm capable to stand up here and preach to you because some people thought that I was not. And I'm probably not. But then I think about the people at ALC and I say, what if they saw me living my life here? Preaching this sermon in front of them, they say, there's no way that this is the Evan that I knew. And I say, that's true. It's all God. And so worship team, if you guys could come up. A verse that always sticks out to me is 1 Corinthians 1:26. Remember, dear brothers and sisters, that few of you are wise in the world's eyes, or powerful or wealthy when God called you. Instead, God chose the things the world considered foolish in order to shame those who think they are wise. And he chose things that are powerless to shame those who are powerful. God chose things despised by the world, things counted as nothing at all, and used them to bring to nothing what the world considers important. As a result, no one can boast in the presence of the Lord. It's not me. I'm Evan. But it's all God. What is in your hand? If we can go to that slide with all the key points. God does not call the equipped. He equips the called. God doesn't want you to be something that you are not. And a third point, you are called. You are capable because you are incapable. What if in our lives we wiped the slate clean and we thought, you know what? I know that there are things that I'm not able to do. I know there are weaknesses that I have in my life. I know that there's limitations that I put upon myself. But what if that had nothing to do with the call that God had on your life? What if we prayed to him and said, God, without any of these limitations, my age, my smarts, my physical abilities, God, what do you have for me? What would he say to you? I know in the beginning I talked about the calling that we all had, calling to follow Jesus, calling to build disciples, and calling to evangelize. And that has nothing to do with our capabilities. And everything to do with what is in our hand. And that's all that God gave us. And so we're going to go into a time where we've got the song, I Give Myself Away. And as we go into that time, I want you to just pray. And actually, if everybody could stand. I want you to talk to God and say, God, I give everything to you. I know the slate is clean. I know that it doesn't have anything to do with what I can do, but it's everything with what you can do. God, what are you calling me specifically to do? And just see what he has to say for your life, calling to be involved with a ministry, calling to give to a student organization, to start a nonprofit. Let's dream for a little bit and see what God has for us. Jesus. You called me. God, you equipped me for the calling, and all we have to do is step in faith. God, I pray that you give each of us the courage to take that step. God, I pray that we don't try to be something that we are not, but we know that we are who we are because that's how you made us. And God, I pray that as we constantly see the inadequacies upon our lives, we know that that is the specific reason why you called us. Jesus, I pray right now that you speak to us the callings that you have, because I'm so excited. Sometimes we don't answer that call fully. But God, I cannot wait to see the opportunity that you have when we do answer the calling, the world impact that we can make, the eternal impact that we can make. God, I can't wait. In your name we pray.
Thanks for joining us for this message from Columbus First Assembly. If this message has blessed you in any way, would you share it on your social media feeds so that others can be blessed also? If you would like to join us for an in-person service and you're close to us, we are in Columbus, Indiana, then our services start at 10 o'clock on Sunday mornings, and our church is located on the corner of 10th and Iowa. Once again, thanks for joining us. Look forward to having you join us again soon.